When DC Comics failed to get the rights to make a comics adaptation of the Planet of the Apes, Jack Kirby was asked to come up with something similar. What he came up with was a series whose world does bear quite a resemblance to the Apes setting, but with a bunch of crazy Kirby sci-fi elements mixed in. This week, Emmet and I resume our look at Kirby's DC years as we discuss the first 10 issues of Kamandi, the Last Boy on Earth. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon, and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support. This is Tim.
This is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Emmet in Melbourne area. Far from Melbourne, but much closer to Melbourne than I am.
Yeah, let's just go with that. Hi, Tim. How are things?
Okay.
Usually at this time, I try to inject some levity with a description of all sorts of wildlife shenanigans.
Pooping kangaroos, yeah.
So on. But I wanted to do something different this time. I actually just wanted to mention that a copy of Kate Beaton's Ducks arrived today from Cockatoo Comics, who are Siobhan Coombs' comics business out in New South Wales. And I was moved to order this because of the recent episode that you folks did with Kumar.
Yeah, Kumar and yeah, was that me? I think it was. It's hard to remember anymore. I listened to all of them and did I actually do that or did I just edit it? Anyway.
Yeah. And the discussion really moved me. I thought it was very... I was like, I need to read this. So for anyone listening to this right now, I would recommend checking out that episode, Ducks. But yeah, I also just wanted to give you, a tip of the hat, Tim, and everyone else who works in this podcast, because I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I want to read this.
Okay.
I got myself a copy,
Okay, great.
So yeah, I just wanted to share that feedback.
Okay. All right. So we're resuming our walk through, I guess, all of Jack Kirby's DC work, not only Fourth World. We've pretty much exhausted that, but we then talked about the Demon, and now we're going to get started on Kamandi, the Last Boy on Earth. There's more of this than there is of the Demon, and we were going to try to do the first 12 issues, but we decided this episode will be the first 10.
It's more of a natural break, I think.
Yeah, in terms of the story, yeah, because 13 has a lot to do with 12, it looks like. I didn't read 13 yet, but of course, Kirby is writer and editor. Letterer and inker is Mike Royer.
Yes.
Kirby wrote and drew 37 issues, and then drew 38 through 40, which were scripted by Jerry Conway. And apparently, back at the time, this is 1972, DC wanted to do an adaptation of Planet of the Apes in comics, but they couldn't get the rights. So they talked to Kirby, said, do something kind of like Planet of the Apes. I was interested by that because I had never seen any Planet of the Apes movie. So last week I watched the original.
Oh, wow.
For comparison.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so if you've seen Planet of the Apes, but you've never read Kamandi, imagine that it's Planet of the Apes, but a lot of other mammals are now intelligent, not only gorillas.
Yeah.
And there are, just like in Planet of the Apes, there are wild humans. A few of them can talk, at least a little bit, aside from Kamandi. There are also 3 kind of human-type guys who have this nuclear power that allows them to live in this post-apocalyptic world. And then just all kinds of other weird Kirby science fiction stuff, as we've seen in all these other series we've been talking about.
Funny you should mention that, because I didn't know you hadn't seen the Planet of the Apes movies. As the Planet of the Apes movies progress, some of those Kirby style ideas start creeping in as well.
Okay.
So, you're the likes of your Ben Boxer and the Cyclone Heart and all the rest of that, Cyclotron Heart. I'm not saying it's the same idea, but there's a similar idea.
So
I won't spoil it for you.
The Apes people were reading Kirby's comics, maybe.
I wonder. I always wonder. I think everyone was reading Kirby's comics.
George Lucas.
Yeah, they were all at it. But yeah, no, it's funny. You mentioned that they couldn't get the rights to Planet of the Apes to make a comic. Marvel scooped them. Marvel got the rights.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think subsequently lost them. I was interviewing an Australian comic creator, Gary Challoner, years ago now, on a podcast, and my co-host at the time loved a book he'd done. He'd done a Planet of the Apes comic book, a miniseries called Urchok's Folly. And he happened to mention this, and Gary was really sort of, oh, he's a lovely man. He was very sort of, oh, that's very kind of you. And then I think a month later, the series turned up in my postbox. He just, he autographed it and sent them off to us. He was just lovely, just a lovely gesture. So yeah, that's another. If you're interested, and anyone else out there is interested, like Planet of the Apes, Arcana, whatever, Gary Challoner's Urchok's Folly, Planet of the Apes miniseries. It might be Dark Horse. I'm not sure. Maybe it was Eclipse. It was one of those. Check that out too.
So another difference between Kamandi and Planet of the Apes is that there's never any doubt that you're on Earth. That's, spoiler alert, that's the shock ending of the first movie.
Tim, you're the only person who hasn't seen it. You're the only person.
Well, I've seen it now, but and I had that ending spoiled for me years earlier.
Yes.
I don't remember
There's a
now
Simpsons song routine about it.
where I first saw it spoiled, if it was in like a comic or something, but that was like 10 or 20 years ago. Like, oh, really? That's the ending? So I knew what was coming. But so in this, Kamandi is the last of a group of people who were in an underground bunker called Command D, which somehow that completely flew right by me the first time. The others have died off, and his grandfather is the last to die except leaving Kamandi. And by the way, apparently later it's revealed that Kamandi's grandfather was Buddy Blank of Kirby's OMAC series, which we'll get to sometime in the future. And of course, there's been a lot of mucking with the Kamandi continuity since then by other creators, but and I read about a little bit of that on Wikipedia, but we're not really going to get into that in this discussion. So Kamandi comes out of the bunker, having been reviewing. I forgot to mention, there was some kind of a natural disaster that left a lot of radiation, and that's what they were in this bunker protecting themselves from. And Kamandi had been looking a lot of microfilm of like what Earth was like, and so then he comes out and Earth isn't like that at all anymore. The humans are now like animals, and the tigers and lions and bears and gorillas and rats are now human-like and intelligent and fighting each other, and each one seems to have taken on its own kind of career path. Like some kind of animal was all like poachers or something, and the lions are all like park rangers, and it's interesting.
Yeah, it gets kind of complex because they're all representing different groups, all the different animal species, and they're quite stratified. I found a map of the world where all the different groups are and what's happened to all the different nations that we remember. Ireland gets turned into a sort of a footstool to a sort of metastasizing continental growth that comes out of America. It's like Ireland's just not there anymore. It's like it's just the landing point of this huge rocky expanse. I was like, oh, that's appropriate. But I also thought what was really appropriate was Australia has become. I just copied this in the notepad so I get it right. Kanga Rat Murder Society. Fair. Very fair. But he has a lot of fun with that. He's got all the different nation states. Unfortunately, he falls into the same trap that a lot of other creators have fallen in. Now, I wonder if this is actually Kirby. I assume it is, because it's his art. So I assume it's his idea. But again, we have the old trope of Africa is just like it's the dark continent. So it's Mad Hole, country of the screamers, which is this massive expanse in the center of Africa. And then there's the Snake City of Gold, which is maybe the Côte d'Azur or Mozambique. It's around there. And then the buried mystery city is Johannesburg. And you have, but incredibly, you've got a section which is the Black Bay of Oil, which is where most of Egypt and Libya and all that is just like an oil expense. So, commentary, But I raise all this because there's a lot of fun being had here with the different animals, the mammalian species, and some of the other species we meet who've become enlarged or changed or altered in some way. But as you're saying, they are shown to take on maybe ceremonial roles. And what's interesting about that is at a certain point, I got confused. I thought there'd been a typo. But the animals refer to themselves as human. And the humans, as we would see them, are referred to as animals.
Yeah, so, that's a little disorienting. I mean, in Planet of the Apes call themselves simians.
Right.
They're not thinking that they're now humans. But yeah, in this, the animals, because they are now intelligent, being human means that you are more intelligent than the other animals.
Yes, animals is a term of disrespect. I think that's a fascinating idea, and it's sort of explored in a really interesting way that human is just how an intelligent species refers to itself is human, and I thought that was a nice little creative flex. It's sort of just thrown into an aside, so it isn't really explored. Like nobody has. I think there isn't a debate about this, despite the fact that Kamandi, in most of his appearances, one of two things happens. One, he loudly attacks somebody for assuming he can't speak.
Yeah.
Two, he is knocked unconscious. Those are the two recurring events of this series.
But yeah, I thought it was interesting that on several occasions in these first 10 issues, Kamandi, he seems kind of offended by this reversal. Like humans are supposed to be on top, and he wants to somehow try to get humans back on top. I mean, there aren't very many to join him. The ones that are left are, animals. But I don't know, it felt kind of speciesist.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it is a conversation about racism and a conversation about a person's sense of where they belong.
Yeah, well, I definitely felt like the animals could kind of be seen as different races.
That's the implication. Yeah. But it's disturbing to us to see it laid out like this. But this represents the stratification of society. That's what this is. It's all these different competing groups fighting over territory, fighting over status, and there's a pecking order within these animal groups, and go, oh well, these are hyper-evolved animals. They're just enacting what animals do. But Kirby's laid out in such a way, the fact that they refer to themselves as being human, Kirby's laid out that actually that's not too different from our society in a way. Even we choose to refer to our society as a sort of unifying thing, but it's not. It's broken in all sorts of different ways, and I think that's an interesting point of inquiry, let's say, to this, like what the point of this series is. Let's not overthink it. It's also hyper evolved animals with rifles and cars hunting down a lone fair haired young half naked boy. I don't know where this is going, but it's also that. But I think there is some commentary at work here about racial discrimination and competition within society for all these resources and things that they're all fighting over. The idea of the lions setting themselves up as the park rangers, as you said, that's fascinating idea. And they're up against all the poachers. I just think that's really interesting.
The poachers what were they, leopards?
Were they leopards or were they pumas?
Pumas. Maybe they were pumas.
Not sure, but yes. We later meet the bat people as well. That was fun too. I like the bat people.
Right. Yeah, and I guess these animals, I mean, you might wonder, why are lions and tigers living in North America? But apparently, in the disaster, they got out of zoos in America, and they talk a couple of times about living. Their legend is that they came from the land of Zoo, Z-U-U, the Washington Z-U-U, Washington Zoo, Philadelphia Zoo.
I really like that. I thought that was great. I'm just the different and it's like their points of origin, you know. Yeah, I love that. I thought it was fantastic. It's a nice little touch.
Let's see. Well, shall we kind of walk through these issues?
Yeah. I was even just scanning through the pages as you were talking there a moment ago, because I was looking to confirm, and yes, they are in fact pumas. They refer to themselves as pumas.
Okay.
So we got that one right, the poachers.
And just in case you didn't realize that this is based on Planet of the Apes, the Statue of Liberty is on the cover of issue 1.
Yeah, that's interesting. And there's some fun later on with carved stone figures as well. That sort of ties into the idea of humans as well, because the idea of the half-naked men and women we see like prowling around, they're all sort of bestial. They can't really speak. We're told that they're unintelligent. However, whenever Kamandi speaks to one, they do speak back. You know, they are capable of speech, but they've been reduced in some way. But a lot of the creatures do seem to be aware that there was a preceding race, and they've sort of carried on their traditions, including their sculpture, their art, their architecture, their machinery, all these things. They've carried it forward. But there was this great splash page of sort of Mount Rushmore type stone, bas reliefs, whatever, and then transitioning to the ape statues and the lion statues and all these kind of things. I thought that was it was just a lovely little flourish.
Yeah, so Kamandi has been exploring. He's each of these issues, follows the pattern of a lot of Kirby's DC work, where the second and third pages are a big spread. And also the stories are divided into 3 or 4 chapters in each issue. But yeah, on the spread of the first issue, Kamandi is in a little raft. It looks like it might be an inflatable raft, going through Manhattan that's now like half underwater. You can see the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building and some other buildings like sticking out of the water.
He's aware of that last scene. He's aware of that. Again, it was a popular movie at the time, and it sort of is enough of a leaping off point for him then to just go in his own direction with it. So it's an interesting hook for the reader who's like aware of the Planet of the Apes phenomenon. This is page 2, as you say, the big splash page, and then we get stuck into, again, in Planet of the Apes, you had the same idea of humans being reduced in terms of intelligence, but almost immediately we start getting introduced to the different species of animal people. It's really, he just takes hold of it pretty quickly.
Yeah, so he goes back to Command D, the bunker, and finds that there are looters who are wolves, and they have killed his grandfather, and nobody else in the bunker, as I said, is alive, just Command D. And so he faces these wolves, and that kind of gets us going. Then when he gets out of there, then he faces this Tiger Empire. It's kind of like Romans.
Yes, they're modeled after Roman society, and they are the sort of principal antagonists for this section of the story. But like as he travels across America, he starts wandering into the territory of all the different factions, and there'll be different dominant factions as he travels. But we start the proceedings in the Tiger area, which is interesting.
Right. Eastern North America. Say you can see like on page 10 of the story, he's found this truck that he's managing to drive, and you can see a broken New Jersey Turnpike sign.
Yeah, there's little nods to the 20th century here and there, but like we will eventually get to two incredibly audacious moments where Kirby just lifts whole sequences from works of art of the 20th century, and I was like, oh, Jack Kirby, what are you doing?
I'm so looking forward to talking about issue 7, but
yes, we'll get there.
Now, of course, just like in Planet of the Apes, the horses are regular horses. They're not intelligent, so the tigers are riding horses and battling it out with the leopards.
Yeah, we're not going to get into any sort of Goofy and Pluto nonsense here where one's a dog and one's a dog man. It's confusing. Don't think about it.
Right. And yeah, then Kamandi gets knocked out on page 14.
Take a drink, folks. Happens a lot. He gets knocked out more times than Giles in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's how many times he gets knocked out. It's nuts.
Lots of head trauma. So he's put in like a dog pound wagon and taken to the kennels where there are other, what we would call humans who are, animalistic humans. And, and then there are some dogs who are intelligent.
And the dog's feeding him slop.
Yeah.
Which I like as well. See how you like it.
And just like in Planet of the Apes, the other creatures are like, they can't believe that a human could like shoot a gun or talk, or it's weird to them, and they'll try to explain it away. They won't grasp that this is a different kind of human. This is like the old type of human, the earlier model.
I think my favorite moment in Planet of the Apes is when Charlton Heston's character kisses the ape scientist, and she's like, "You're so damn ugly." I just love that little moment.
Now, we keep getting references also to, like, space race and nuclear weapons, although apparently the disaster was not a nuclear war. I guess Kirby said that explicitly at some point. And he keeps referring to it in the comic as a natural disaster. But, yeah, in this first issue, we see that the tigers worship a warhead, nuclear warhead.
Again, you need to keep watching the Planet of the Apes movies, man. That comes up too. I got confused at a certain point because, part of my confusion is, like, as with a lot of the Kirby stuff we've been reviewing, I haven't actually gone to the source on some of this, but I've picked up on other creators riffing on Kirby a lot. And Grant Morrison's Final Crisis, because it was such a love letter to all things Kirby, does dip in. We see Command D, and we actually see the emergence of Kamandi, the character, and there are all sorts of animal-like creatures, and one of the hints of the story is that the Earth is left in such a destroyed state, like cosmically warped and twisted by Darkseid's fall, that the events of the Kamandi series with Jack Kirby follow Final Crisis. That is one of the hits, that it was actually a crisis event where, like, the actual surface of the Earth and the people who lived on the Earth and were completely fundamentally altered, and the superheroes managed to create a sort of miniaturized ark with the population of the Earth that contained within it and sent off into a replacement planet Earth. So that's one of the... It's not explored. I don't think anyone else has picked it up since. But that was one of the hints as to where Kamandi has come from. That's a retcon that follows a retcon that follows a retcon. There's all sorts of explanations as to what happened. I think we all assumed it was a nuclear event. And in Kamandi as well, there is a issue with... I'm going to mispronounce this, but Morticoccus...
the worst germ ever.
Which also is in Final Crisis. That also pops up there too.
Okay.
And I thought, when I read that issue of this, I was like, is he saying it was a biological plague that wiped out human society and then left the survivors in this state, and then all the other creatures evolved in the vacuum that had been left. I don't think that's what he's saying either, though. I think that was just sort of a side event. That's a sort of related thing that happened, but it's not what happened. It's not the Great Disaster.
Yeah, the Great Disaster left radiation, so the germ would not do that. But yeah, reading the Wikipedia page, I saw like contradictory explanations for like why the people are dumb and the animals are smart.
I don't think it's meant to be explained. It's not one of these things where it's just, what do you think it was? And it's the kind of thing that works as in a piece of allegory where it can be climate change. It could be nuclear war. It could be it could be anything. Substitute your disaster of choice.
Yeah, but the subsequent creators are always going to try to explain it.
That's the problem. That's what you shouldn't do. What you shouldn't do is try to explain away, because then you ruin the magic of the original work.
Yeah.
Which wasn't yours.
Yeah, well, just like when they came up with Wolverine's origin story. No, don't do that, and it sucked besides. So I hated the last issue of that. But anyway, so then he meets Ben Boxer. He and these two other guys have this kind of nuclear power. Let's see, I put it in my notes. Okay, Ben and Renzi and Steve, interesting combination of names. They were born with hearts that function like cyclotrons and can produce a biological version of atomic fission. Fission results in a physical change, and their bodies become an armor as strong as steel. That's the explanation in issue 10. So we see them turn into like Silver Surfer, basically, but that's an armor, and so they're able to fight and not get injured.
I've also seen them compared frequently to Colossus from the X-Men, which would be after this too, and you can see that as a point of inspiration, certainly. Mm-hmm. They are interesting in that they sort of represent a surviving version of humanity, even though they are inhuman themselves. Mm-hmm. There is something about they've preserved human culture. The Kamandi can speak to them. They're intelligent. They have sophisticated technology. And the more they appear over the course of these 10 issues, the more we learn that they're actually not sort of the standard bearers for human civilization. They are in quite reduced circumstances themselves, which I think was good because there are these continual hints. There's one or two endings which involve Kamandi literally flying off into the sunset with these cybernetic men, where it's like, well, we're off to a better place. We're going to it's going to be a better tomorrow, and we're going to live in this place where I'll fit in. And when we finally get there, though, of course, there's a twist. But I thought that was good because I was concerned that we've just arrived. We didn't mention Dr. Canis, but Dr. Canis is a dog scientist who introduces Kamandi to Ben, and he's one of the first sort of father figures that Kamandi meets within these different species hierarchical groups. Mm-hmm. Every couple of issues, there is a sympathetic figure who sort of takes them under their wing and tries to show them how to survive and offers them the choice of staying with them. But Kamandi has a tendency to go off. Yes. So it goes wrong. But Ben is Ben Boxer, who's the sort of leader of these artificial men. He's almost like the ideal form of that father figure type, but he is also lacking. Well, he's not human for a start. And he seems to be working to an agenda. So he's more mission oriented. He's not trying to live as such. He's meeting objectives. And Kamandi ultimately seems to want to restore a life world of humanity where people can actually live and love and so forth. And that's what's the impossible task because the earth is so altered. So I find that interesting in terms of he's still pursuing that. As where I've got up to, he's still pursuing this idea of trying to return humanity to its proper place at the top of the food chain, but it's not happening, and he seems to be in denial about that. I think that's kind of fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And so issue 1 ends with a map showing like North America and a bit of South America and like maybe up to the North Pole, and what's in those locations now. Yeah, when I was Googling around, I did see that full world map, but I didn't look at it closely. But this shows, the expanding tiger empire in like the eastern third of the U.S., what was the U.S., guerrilla communes in the area of like Texas, Missouri, and then lion tribes in the western third. Canada and Alaska are now the dominion of the devils. We haven't seen that yet in these first 10 issues. There's a wild human preserve in Mexico. And later on in these 10 issues, we go to South America where Tracking Site is. That's a whole other thing. So how can we summarize? We've only done one issue, and we've been talking for half an hour already.
We've been dipping into, we're not referring to different things.
Talk about every page here.
No.
So let's see. Issue 2 has, the nuclear guys turning into armor. It's got tigers and, Dr. Canis. And Ben and Kamandi leave in this, like, small submarine. Dr. Canis sets them up with that and says goodbye to them. And so, they're still in the area of what was Manhattan, and we see a submerged Circle Line ferry under the water that's, half destroyed, of course. And there are rats in, like, scuba gear living in what was New York, along with some fish.
It's a great line. Ben, did you ever hear of a frog rat? Like, every now and then a bit of humor leaks through here.
Mm-hmm. And of course, they get captured by the rats. I don't know if they got knocked out. It's not clear. But, no, when Kamandi awakens. Yep, okay, issue 2 and second time he got knocked out. It's maybe like every issue. I'm having
another drink, Tim.
Yeah, you'll be plastered by the end of the series. But they're captured by the rats.
I love the design of the rat people. I love it. It's so great. I love their look. They're just awful. They're horrible.
More discussion of Kamandi coming up. Old comics can be pretty amusing. Don't you love it? The $sign on the bag.
Yeah.
That means it has money in it. And the early issues of Amazing Spider-Man are no exception.
And there's this line about Mark Twain in here, which has to be the funniest thing Stan Lee ever wrote.
Join me, Tim, along with a rotating cast of Emmet.
Yes, let's Snopes.com this issue of Spider-Man.
Patrick.
Haha, I'm here. Now you must feel my wrath.
And Kumar.
To say you just hit the jackpot about herself is so great.
As we make our way through the transition from Ditko to Ramita, and Peter Parker's transition from being a high school student with a doting aunt,
Aunt May's wearing a Peter, Peter's wearing an Aunt May,
to a college student with his own pad, facing the big questions in life.
Why is Gwen having a party on a Sunday?
It's Spider-Man transitions, along with Spidey's early years discussed in Spider-Man 1963, when Pete's romantic life was nothing but stress.
Oh, he hates me because he looked at my coffee cup.
We raise all the big questions. Why do you put these two wimpy guys in suits and ties to guard a super strong man? Our patrons are enjoying Spider-Man transitions. Paul Spence wrote, "Gentlemen, you provided some very funny commentary on this issue. This was a great episode and it was very funny. Keep up the great work."
it just seemed unlikely that, he would go into melee with the rhino and not get his arm snapped.
Support us at patreon.com/deconcomics for at least $4 a month to hear our monthly podcast as we move toward issue 50.
This is the last face you'll see. And then he puts on the Green Goblin mask. He's like, no, this is the last face you'll see.
Support us at patreon.com/deconcomics.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin Podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin Podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
So, wrapping up issue 2, they escape from the rats and they go up into the guy's kind of Zeppelin.
Zeppelin, blimp, whatever you want to call it.
That they have to just kind of climb up these ropes or be pulled up by them. I don't know who's pulling them up because there aren't any other people. But
that was something I only belatedly realized as well. Yeah, I assumed there was a crew on board, but no, there isn't. It's all automated, I assume.
Subconsciously thought that too, but yeah, I was just thinking no, because there aren't any other people. So, but it doesn't look like they're climbing. It looks like the ropes are being pulled up. So I'm kind of confused about what's going on there. Anyway, so they're heading for tracking site, or trying to. In the 3rd issue, they're in the gorilla commune area, and we've skipped ahead a bit. And of course, Kamandi is fighting the gorillas to start out. And does he get knocked out? Yeah, I think he does.
He does. Almost immediately. Okay, fine. I'll do it again.
Emmet takes another drink.
I was perplexed by this because I was going, so this is going to be episodic. So we're just going to have Kamandi in these places, and then we're going to learn about this new place, and we're just going to cut and then have another one. But no, actually, it turns out there is an explanation as to how he got from being with Ben Boxer and his 2 artificial companions to being in this new territory. Mm-hmm. So it's fine. It's a bit of a, that tendency to skip to the end at the beginning of the story. Very John Wick.
Finally on page 11 of the story, we see Ben and the others, and they're waiting for Kamandi.
Where did Kamandi go? I'm reading the collected Kamandi Last Boy on Earth volume, and the edition I have, at the end of issue 2, there's a little essay by Jack Kirby.
Yeah, I saw that. I think I skimmed through it.
It sort of touches on what we were talking about before, where it's this idea of possible apocalypses, possible collapses for human civilization, all the different things that may or may not happen. It's very pop science-y, but it's fascinating just in terms of a sense of Jack Kirby, the thinker, at work here, and just somebody who was perfectly happy to write down, here's my thought process, here's where I'm going with this, and he comes across really, really interesting. Just you get some insight into the way he thinks, and I'd recommend reading it if you get this collection or if you can find this essay. So it's called The Great Earth Cataclysm Syndrome, and I just found it, just fruitful given what we were talking about before as well. That's what was on his mind when he approached this project.
So these gorillas in the commune area, their transportation is kind of a high-tech approximation of swinging from vines. And of course they also ride horses, but you can see their city in the 2-page spread at the beginning of chapter 2 in issue 3, where the gorillas are swinging back and forth across the city.
Yeah, you can see that inspiration he takes from habitats in zoos as well, where there's a suggestion of like the ape species being locked in the cage with the bars, the swing off, and here they that's evolved into how they build their habitats now. They've got these bars in the swing off and pulling around. We also have a sequence where Kamandi reenacts David and Goliath because he's read that. Yeah, it's a fun little beat. It's a fun moment.
And they find some old NASA stuff.
Yes.
Artifacts related to moon flights.
Yeah, and we also have the first appearance of alien life in this issue as well. So aliens are also on the table.
Alien. So are we talking about this, the rock creature thing that's from the moon?
Yeah. The suggestion is that it's returned to Earth on board a shuttle of some kind, and maybe it's also been affected by whatever the great disaster was, but it's not human life. It's not Earth life. Is the implication, I thought.
No, it looks like kind of like a huge tortoise that walks on two legs.
And it generates electricity as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Aliens are now also in the mix too.
Yeah. So, and we see the part of this. They're in what was Las Vegas, and there are cars, parked along a broken up road, and there are skeletons in and around the cars. Kamandi walks through destroyed Las Vegas, and with all the like casino signs and stuff.
Yeah, I do want to see more post-apocalyptic stories set in and around Las Vegas, because it's a fantastic visual. I mean, my favorite one is Fallout New Vegas, the video game. Possibly my least favorite is Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead, which was just an amazing wasted opportunity. But Vegas just has that perfect sort of, the idea of trashing Vegas. There's a visceral appeal to that. It's like, yeah, I want to trash Vegas. But it also has a sense of tragedy to it as well, because so many people come there, to try and eke out a living or get rich. So the idea of all those people having been killed in this event is quite sad too. So it's got this pathos to it. So I do like this sequence. It's just you've got all the different landmarks briefly touched on here before we get back to David versus Goliath round 2.
So in issue 4, they're still in Vegas, and they're looking through a shopping center, and it opens with Kamandi reading The Demon #1.
Okay, this is what I was referring to earlier as well. This and what we're going to come to later, that other issue. But this moment is just fantastic. Like Kirby just having a character read one of his own books. Oh, I love it. I know when this doesn't work. I apologize for continually referring to movies on this podcast, but that's part of our culture.
That's a long tradition on this show, and I keep saying I have no idea what you're talking about, but that goes back to episode 1. So go ahead.
There is a recent Michael Bay movie called Ambulance, where characters in this Michael Bay movie refer to other Michael Bay movies more than once. Different movies. So they're in a Michael Bay movie, but they've been to see The Rock. So they talk about The Rock, I think. And I think there's another scene where somebody talks about Bad Boy. I'm pretty sure it's Bad Boys. But I was like, the audacity of you, Michael Bay, the audacity to have these completely unnatural conversations where people just apparently enthusiastically talk about your movies in this really stilted way. Whereas this, I love this. This is brilliant. Like, it's Kamandi holding up an issue of The Demon.
Yeah, it's issue 1.
Which would be its contemporary publication, wouldn't it? Because they came out at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And Kamandi says, I found some of the old comic magazines that are still quite readable, but don't worry, Ben, I'll hold my share of the food. Yeah. They're still quite readable. Both in the fact that they physically survived, and there's some interesting stuff in here.
Yeah, well, and on the next page, he's hoping to find another source of comic magazines.
I love
He's
it.
going to be bagging and boarding before we know it.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what you do in the apocalypse. Absolutely. You need a reliable source of entertainment that doesn't require energy. Comic books. They've got everything.
Yeah, so as they're getting food and stuff from this destroyed shopping mall around Vegas, and then they're trying to go back up into their blimp, and the tigers come along. So, the tigers are, trying to expand their empire. So they're in the gorilla area here. So, of course, there's a fight between tigers and gorillas. And, of course, Kamandi gets knocked out. I had not noticed it. It's happened in every issue so far.
God damn it.
Emmet takes another drink.
Bloody hell. I've got work in the morning. Yeah, no, it's a territorial dispute. We start to move out of the tiger gorilla area soon, but then different conflicts replace these ones. So that's to maintain the novelty of it. But yeah, this idea that there's these different factions all around them, and they'll just burst on the scene at any moment, and Kamandi's got to deal with it, or in this case, get repeatedly knocked unconscious.
Yeah, amidst guerrilla warfare.
Why?
Yeah, and the gorillas have captured Kamandi, knocked out, of course. And Ben and the others are someplace else. He doesn't know where they are, and he gets thrown in a pit with some wild humans who, by the way, talk in like complete sentences. Look, he's new here. I don't like him. He'll take the food. Stop him. Kill him. So they're a little bit more intelligent than the Planet of the Apes humans.
Yeah, they're speaking. They're speaking English. So it is interesting that the other species refuse to acknowledge that they can speak.
Yeah,
and a Kamandi is some sort of freak.
Mm-hmm.
I guess an argument can be made that they're maybe speaking in a very guttural way and they're not being understood, which again has certain implications. But yeah, I think there is a sense of just they're not really people. They're like parrots. It's mimicry, maybe. That's how they write it off. But Kamandi is speaking complex sentences and actually referencing events in the past, history that he couldn't possibly know, and that's what makes him special.
But Kamandi manages to get a gun and is taking out guerrilla soldiers and gets the other humans to join him in escaping. And he meets this tiger prince named Tufton. It turns out Tufton is wanting to get this, what was it he was trying to get? This airplane that he wants to use for conquest, for attacking the gorillas or whoever else. And Kamandi doesn't want that to happen, so he grabs a handy flamethrower and destroys it. But the relationship with Tufton is interesting because Tufton is angry at him for destroying this plane, and yet he ends up being friends with Kamandi.
Yeah, like he still refers to him in that anger as a mindless little animal. But prior to that, he was sort of admiring how articulate he was, and you speak quite well. Those implications I mentioned before. There you go again. But you see, yes, he still sees himself as superior to him.
Mm-hmm.
So they will never be. I mean, this is where there's always the break with the different characters that Kamandi meets, where there's maybe a more civil exchange as opposed to just being hunted or knocked unconscious by them. He will always find that point where they can't let go of their sense of superiority to him. Like Dr. Canis, Tufton, Silas later. There is this continual moment where Kamandi realizes they don't see me as a person.
Yeah.
I should just get out of here.
Yeah, they're somewhat sympathetic to him, but they don't see him as an equal.
We have a fascinating, splash page again with the apes and the tigers fighting. It's just great stuff. Like, it's so dynamic.
Yeah, this is issue 5.
Yeah, I just love it. I think I love the sense of scale and the chaos of it as well. It's beautiful work.
And he's still with Tufton here. See, I don't think he gets knocked out here. He gets he falls through a weak floor, but yeah, I don't think he's knocked out in that scene.
He has a nasty fall, but he isn't knocked unconscious.
Not yet, anyway.
No, not yet.
And he meets a girl called Flower, who I thought this was interesting. She's Comics Code approved topless. Where I mean, it's not quite so much that her hair is covering her breasts. The breasts are just kind of this like black hole area that's kind of undefined.
Yeah, she's clearly a love interest type, but there's no romance as such between them. He just says he cares for her. She's special to him. They go on to travel together. She's not in the comic for very long. And then later on, there's another character called Spirit, who's basically the same character again. And yeah, they both have the same design, and they are sort of wish fulfillment.
Well, I think it's revealed that they were sisters, right?
They were sisters. Yes, they were sisters. Yeah, I know. We were going to get to it, but they're sisters, and they're identical sisters.
Yeah, she's in like 11 or 12, right? So we won't get to her this time, But
they've also been raised in different circumstances, let's say, and perhaps that's why they are more capable of speech. Like Flower and Kamandi have conversations, and they actually are able to relate to one another. Whereas up to this point, Kamandi's not been shown to be able to interact with another former human. Like it just doesn't work.
Well, except that those in the pit that he got to help him escape.
Well, that was more like he created chaos. They're just a mob.
Yeah, but there was clear English communication between them, and actually they spoke English better than Flower does. Flower is kind of me Tarzan, you Jane kind of English.
I did want to raise that actually as well. I think you're right. Sorry, that's a good point. I did want to raise that as well. This seems to be a reworked Tarzan narrative as well. That's the other point too. The sole man among all these creatures, and Tarzan could communicate with the gorillas and the apes and all the different species he interacted with. So there is that sense of Kirby taking that concept and just flipping it a bit. The wild man in a sophisticated civilization. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting.
I feel a little bit like Kirby might have been a little accidentally inconsistent on the abilities of the wild humans to talk. I'm not sure that it was completely planned out this way, that sometimes they can speak in complete 20th century English sentences, and sometimes they talk like Tarzan, and sometimes they just say and arg, like on page 10 of issue 5.
Yeah, it could be that they're different pockets of, what were once humans have degraded even more.
Yeah, there are ways you can explain it, but...
Yeah, it's not explained. Like, nothing really is explained.
No.
It's all just, this is where the story is at now. This is what's happening now.
Well, and if something is explained, it just raises more questions.
Yes. Yes.
But Kamandi and Flower try to escape. Well, then he ends up getting captured, and he has to fight a gorilla in a coliseum. And, of course, he wins, and Tufton sees him out there, and Tufton's father is kind of upset that he didn't let Kamandi die. And then there's more war, explosions. Oh, and then I loved the conflict resolution using a slot machine.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's great stuff. Gamble with death. But yeah, it's fantastic.
So Kamandi and Flower take off, and then we're in issue 6. And I guess he didn't get knocked out in issue 5, did he? Or did I miss it?
Whew, no, he didn't get knocked out. He will almost immediately get knocked out in the next issue, though.
Right, yeah, page 5 of the next issue, he gets a weapon thrown at him by, I guess these turn out to be the lions. They're wearing helmets here. We can't see like what kind of creatures they are yet, but these are the park ranger lions. Yeah, this must be in Mexico where the wild humans were, according to the map. Yeah, these are the lions. And yeah, so they're in like a nature reserve. But yeah, I mean, Kamandi would have had great opportunity here to get romantic with Flower, but there's no evidence that he does.
No.
Of course, it's comics code, so who knows? But
yeah, but it's a weird relationship, and as you mentioned before, Flower's capacity for speech being somewhat reduced as well. It's an uncomfortable one too. It's he's got advantages over her.
Yeah.
And it's a weird sort of wish fulfillment fantasy that gets trotted out here. Mm-hmm. It's not Scott and Barda. Like, Scott and Barda are completely different. Like, there's a completely different dynamic there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then here are the puma poachers that he fights against, and then eventually the lions come in and catch them, I think.
But only after, Flower sacrifices her life to protect Kamandi.
Flower dies already. So, having read this, then when I was watching Planet of the Apes, I was expecting Nova to die, and she didn't. It's like, huh?
Keep watching.
Okay.
Yeah, this made me really sad. I really, Flower was an interesting introduction into the comic, and I wanted to see where this was going. Mm-hmm. And then she's summarily dispatched. And then, as we've mentioned before, in the next episode that we do on this, we'll meet Spirit. And it just felt like, it's a classic example of, Gail Simone's girlfriends are in the refrigerator concept. Flower's death serves just to add pathos and motivation to Kamandi. There's her life doesn't really mean, and then she's replaced by an identical twin who speaks like her, looks exactly like her, and also seems compelled to follow Kamandi. So
maybe Kirby was regretting killing Flower, so let's bring in her sister. I wonder. Like, he may have painted himself into a corner in terms of the whole situation that unfolds with the poachers, where he's up by himself trying to look out for them, and they basically double back around him. And there's an interesting idea that the lions are using Kamandi to draw out the poachers, so they can catch them. But it's not. It feels like a short issue because we just rattle through it, and then one of the characters we've just met dies, and that's the end of that. Yeah.
It's unsatisfying.
Okay, issue 7. So on the cover, we see Kamandi. He's like lying on some kind of concrete, and there's like a tower, what appears to be a tower next to him. There's a big like gorilla hand or foot, maybe hand, kind trying to pick him up. And in the background, we see a couple of biplanes. And the blurb says, "You'll say it's impossible, incredible, it could never happen, but it does," to Kamandi, the last boy on Earth. And yes, that's right. There's a giant gorilla in this issue named Tiny who manages to grab Kamandi, thinking of him as a toy, climb a skyscraper, and the lions employ... Was it lions or tigers?
Lions.
Yeah, the lions find this... They have this ancient technology that they've run across, these flying machines that fly around the gorilla after it's climbed a tall building. What does this sound like? They seem to be airplanes from about 1933. And, of course, the gorilla lets go of Kamandi and then falls to his death. And the punchline is Kamandi saying, "Even the ancients, with their imaginative movies, couldn't have produced anything like this."
Do you know what, Tim? Do you know what? He's right. Because you know what's special about Tiny? Tiny can speak. So it's worse than King Kong. It's so much worse. Because he's actually saying what he's thinking. It's like when I saw The Neverending Story as a kid and the horse dies because it drowns in the marsh of sadness or whatever it's called. The Swamp of Sadness. I was like, oh, that's really depressing. And then I read the novel. The original novel by Michael Ende, and the horse speaks. It makes it so much worse because he's actually he tells Atreyu what he's feeling. He tells him about how depressed he is and there's no point to life anymore. He might as well just die. I was like, oh my god. This is similar to that. Yeah, it's such a cheeky move. It's so cheeky.
Yeah, it's like the whole issue is just a setup for this gag.
It's so... I prefer the demon. I think that little panel of Kamandi reading the demon comic, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful little moment. I really enjoy it. This isn't as good as that because, as you say, it's overextended. It goes over the course of the entire issue.
Yeah, I loved it.
But it is great fun. It's great fun. It's a highlight of these issues. Yeah, definitely.
So the cover of issue 8 has some lions chasing Kamandi. These are, humanoid lions wearing purple jumpsuits amidst huge busts of 20th century presidents. Nixon, Kennedy, and Johnson.
Yeah, exactly. We're being threatened with the prospect of Nixon, Kennedy, and Johnson being on Mount Rushmore. That's what it feels like to me. But when we actually do see these, they're much smaller. So it's
on page 1 of the story. Yeah, this section of the museum holds statuary of your species, Kamandi. Can you identify them? I've seen them in a microfilm library. They're presidents, Sultan.
So is the suggestion here that the lions were one of the few animal species that could handle the sort of concept of being preceded by these animals that now they basically tend to as a threatened species, whereas all the other animal races couldn't. They're in denial about humanity being the dominant species. They just won't acknowledge it. But the lions do acknowledge it, and they're actually trying to preserve as much as they can of their culture. I feel like that's what this seems to be about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're in a museum where there are statues of notable lions, but also the Lincoln statue from the Lincoln Memorial, although it's kind of broken away at the bottom.
Yeah, because it's been excavated. But yeah, and the lions have since mimicked this style of stonework and celebration of great men, great leaders, great figures in history. They're all men. Because then we see accompanying the Lincoln statue, we see all the different historical great lions shown here too. In fact, one is depicted in the pose of the thinker as well, which I thought was a nice touch.
So, issue 8, he's in the city with the lions, with the Sultan is the lion that he's with, kind of the next animal father figure. And Kamandi is scandalized to see another human on a leash led by a female lion. And he he gets angry at this pet and calls him a slave and a traitor and punches him, gets in a fight with him. It turns out that this pet human was trained to kill. So Kamandi has his hands full. But yeah, he really loses his temper in this issue.
And it's interesting as well because the pet is sort of coded as being it's a male, but is coded as being quite femme. The style of clothing is very it looks like a male review dancer. There is this sort of idea of this being a toy, a to be looked upon, and then there's the reveal because he calls him a slave, a traitor, and you junked a proud heritage for a leash, but then we have the reversal, where it turns out that this pet actually is a deadly killer.
Yeah,
it's like a security dog, really, and is well able to fight back. So maybe it's like a preening, pampered, like Alsatian that you don't want to piss off because it will turn on you. But yeah, that's the. It's a fun sequence, and just the depiction of this creature, this man dog creature. I find it one of the more striking sequences in the series, actually. The introduction, the way they're presented, the suggestion of sort of submissiveness and gendered exhibition, and then just it flips, it turns. I thought it's a really interesting couple of pages.
So Sultan's not sure what to do with Kamandi, so he takes him out of the city. And there's looking at a wreck of an old train. They run into some humanoid bears, and then Ben Boxer and his friends show up.
Yes, literal Deus Ex Machina. Yeah, they're back, and they have their sort of steel armored powers again, and they fight the bears, and we got a bit of an excuse for an action scene, and then we move their storyline along, which is. Now we're back to their storyline, which is like recovering all these artifacts and this technology and a sense of what was lost. So that's why they're in this location, and they just happen to meet Kamandi. But yeah, this is what I was referring to earlier, where the issue ends with Kamandi saying, well, you're not what man used to be, but you're not lions or tigers either. I won't feel strange in your town, which is the sort of dramatic irony about what's about to unfold.
You're going to feel strange everywhere. So they go to tracking site in issue 9, which now tracking site. Well, first they encounter a bunch of human-sized bats. Tracking site kind of reminded me of that early issue of Jimmy Olsen. You remember with the floating little, what was a kind of a compact planet with vampires and Frankenstein's monsters on it.
Yes.
And here we have another floating orb, but in this case, it's one that they go inside rather than shrink down to walk on it as a planet. But before that, when they first arrive at tracking site, they have this kind of a ritual of landing by splashing down just like the Apollo capsules did, and having a welcoming ceremony by kind of these robots, Servitex.
I love that idea that they fetishized the Apollo landing and the return of the astronauts to Earth, and they just do this every time they dock.
Yeah, and Ben tells him you don't need to salute, but because the Servitex are saluting, so Kamandi feels like he has to too. I can't help it, Ben. It's just like reliving an astronaut return welcome. But then some of the Servitex turn against them. They got run into a Servitec with some kind of a gun. And it turns out to be controlled by the Misfit, who is, well, we learned later, was the result of some experimentation with mental control, or like controlling things with your mind rather than with your arms and legs. And so his arms and legs, he's this really short little guy with a huge brain. He can't walk, but yeah, he can use his mind to move things.
He's very familiar Kirby type as well. We've seen this type. We've seen it in the Fourth World as well. We've seen the idea of like the twisted genius with an oversized brain that is just full of bitterness and lashing out, and that's what the Misfit is. And he's been left behind by Ben and his companions with these robots, and he's gained complete control over testing site now.
Yeah,
and
tracking
has his
site.
own plans. Tracking site, sorry.
So he's captured Ben and his friends, and does he knock out Kamandi? No, I guess he doesn't.
He restrains him.
Well, he puts this kind of a papoose around his neck and rides him like a really malevolent baby, and shows him, Mortococcus, the ultimate germ. It's huge, visible, it's around the size of a largish dog in a vial. As soon as it could, if it were released, it would immediately like wipe out everything on Earth, every living thing.
Yeah, you wonder why they've kept it in a vial, but yes.
And it seems to have a bit of like consciousness, like it wants to get out.
And the implication is that, like, the Misfit says that the entire tracking site is designed to restrain Orthococcus itself. Like, it was a containment measure that the scientists had invented.
Yeah. And so in the course of trying to get the Misfit literally off his back, Kamandi accidentally breaks the security system that was keeping the bats out. And these bats are also, of course, really, intent on attacking Kamandi and whoever else, and they're breaking through the walls.
A series of, I think in TV tropes we call it the idiot ball decisions occur here. Like, the tracking site was always under siege by the bat creatures. That's Kamandi was told this at the beginning of the story. He's at the center of tracking site. He learns the tracking site is. This is the power source for the entire station. He destroys it, which immediately turns off all the security measures, which allows the bats to enter and then start tearing up the entire place. So this dead city, as is described as, is like immediately we just arrive and it's immediately trashed. Like, it's immediately destroyed by Kamandi.
Yeah, Kamandi's kind of a bull in the china shop. So in issue 10, the situation is resolved. Basically, they launch tracking site into space because the Misfit is threatening to release the Mortococcus. So they launch him and the Mortococcus into space.
And the bats.
And the bats, yeah.
They got sucked in.
So, yeah, just took care of all their problems by shooting it all into space. And then there was a video presentation in Tracking Site that by Ben Boxer's father, who was a scientist, and he's responsible for Ben and his friends being what they are, as well as for the Misfit.
Yes, I do love the sequence. I love how the gutters have the videotape,
the film reel, yeah,
reel itself.
I don't know if it was a videotape or a
You're
film.
Right. You're right. It's film. You're right. It's real
Well,
film.
no, because Kamandi calls it an old videotape. So
okay,
you're right. It's pre VCR. It's like the old reel to reel videotapes of the early 70s.
But I love that. It's just the borders of the different panels have the symbol of the videotape, and it's just like, yeah, we're watching it play out. It's a really interesting little device to indicate that this is a piece of film he's watching.
Yeah.
Without having to introduce, like, I don't know, unnecessary crackle or spots in the corner of the frame. It's like, no, this is all video. I like that a lot. I think it's a nice device.
Yeah. Kamandi and Ben and his friends are riding in kind of Fantasticar 2.0. Did you notice that?
Yep.
It looks a little cooler than the bathtub Fantasticar of the 60s.
This is the thing we keep encountering when we read these books. Like, he keeps recycling old ideas, but then he adds to them. He sort of looks at them from a different angle and tries to reintroduce something. And it's he made all this stuff. He created all of it, so it's his right to do that. But yeah, no, I found it it was quite funny.
Yeah, and I guess this card doesn't seem to be able to break apart like the Fantasticar, but it with it being white and kind of the shape of it, you can't help but think of the Fantasticar.
But I've been thinking about Fantastic Four since we first met Ben, because immediately my thought was Ben Grimm. And, the tragedy of Ben Grimm has always been that Reed couldn't fix him. Like, that's they keep going back to that well. Whereas here we have a character who's also afflicted by this continuing radiation, and he was just installed with a device in his heart that regulates it and allows him to have a relatively normal life. And I thought, oh, so that's what Reed should have done. He should have found a way to actually generate that cosmic wasn't it cosmic radiation in a new way to allow Ben Grimm to resume his civilian identity. But I immediately thought of Ben Grimm when we met him. So yeah, they're and then there are 4 characters riding in this vehicle, as you say. So it all started like lining up for me.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the first 10 issues. And we're going to keep going in future episodes. Not next week, but pretty soon.
Yeah, like, can we just say that this issue ends with, after all that, like, Kamandi and Ben are now going to go their separate ways. Okay, well, bye. I trashed your city, man. Sorry about that. Although the Misfit had already taken over, so, like, the clock was ticking. But yeah, I love that we had all this build-up to getting to tracking site. We get to tracking site, it gets destroyed, and it's like, all right, I have to go. I have to go somewhere else. My people need me.
Well, we still do see them at the beginning of the next issue, but he gets separated from them again.
You're right. Sorry, we'll get to these, as you say, these other issues shortly. Just as a general comment, I really enjoyed this. I really had a lot of fun. I mean, as I said, I had issues with the death of Flower. I'm not very happy about that. But overall, I just think this is great. There are some spectacular action sequences, some amazing splash pages. And we didn't comment on it, but the actual reveal of tracking site, again, we have some of that sort of mixed media stuff that Kirby was doing.
Oh, right, the collage.
Yeah. So it's just watching him. People would say he's not at his peak, but I think he has a maturity to him here, and he's just going for it with a bunch of approaches to his art, and I really like it.
Yeah, I think it's better than The Demon. The Demon, he didn't really like that genre, and I think it kind of shows, because he just wasn't quite... He couldn't really do science fiction in that environment, and so he's more at home here, I think.
He's always looking for the next thing. He's always trying to look forward. That's the way his brain seems to work as well. He's trying to extrapolate from what's around him currently and seeing where that would go. And the Demon has that Arthurian myth and occult magic interwoven with it. You're right, he just bounces off it. The other one I feel the same sense of just joy is Mr. Miracle, where you just have crazy situations, and it's like, it's apocalypse technology, that's what it can do. And it's just like, he's coming up with these ideas, and he's just, all right, well, apocalypse technology, that's what it does now. It's fun to see Kirby excited by an idea. That's what this feels like to me.
Yeah. Kamandi, The Last Boy on Earth is published by DC. If you've enjoyed this week's show or any other Deconstructing Comics episodes, tell your friends. Share your favorite episodes on your social media. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube by clicking our social media buttons at deconstructingcomics.com. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Next week, Kumar and I discuss a manga that has over-the-top violence but also explores some interesting themes. We'll take on the first 4 volumes of the manga Berserk by Kentaro Miura. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.